everyone, I'm Miss Mary Beth. I'm the Youth Services Librarian at Ingalls Memorial Library in Ringe, and I'm here today for Armchair Adventures. And that's our series where every day we read a little bit of a book, and eventually we finish a whole book together. And the book we're working on right now is The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle. This was written by Hugh Lofting. It's all about this wonderful vet who can also speak to animals. And our main character, Tommy Stubbins, has just met Dr. Dolittle, and it's told from Tommy's point of view. And he's very excited about Dr. Dolittle. He's a very cute and wonderful and happy man who really wants to help the animals. So let's see what happens in Chapter 5, Polynesia. I think your house is the most interesting house I've ever been in, I've said, as we set off in the direction of town. May I come and see you again tomorrow? Certainly, said the doctor. Come any day you like. Tomorrow I'll show you the garden and my private zoo. You have a zoo? I asked. Yes, said he. The larger animals are too big for the house, so I keep them in a zoo in the garden. It's not a very big collection, but it is interesting in its way. It must be splendid, I said, to be able to talk all the languages of the different animals. Do you think I could ever learn to do it? Oh, surely, said the doctor, with practice. You have to be very patient, you know. You really ought to have Polynesia start you. She's the one who gave me my first lessons. Who is Polynesia? I asked. Polynesia is a West African parrot I had. She isn't with me anymore, said the doctor sadly. Why, is she dead? I asked. Oh, no, said the doctor. She's still living. But when we reached Africa, she seemed so glad to get back into her own country that she wept for joy. And when the time came for me to come back here, I had not the heart to take her away from that sunny land. Although it is true, she did offer to come. Ah, well, I have missed her terribly. She wept again when we left. But I think I did the right thing. She was one of the best friends I ever had. It was she who gave me the idea of learning the animal languages and becoming an animal doctor. I often wonder if she remained happy in Africa, and whether I shall see her funny old solemn face again. Oh, good old Polynesia, a most extraordinary bird. Well, well. Just at that moment we heard the noise of someone running behind us, and, turning around, we saw Jip the dog rushing down the road after us, as fast as his legs could bring him. He seemed very excited about something. And as soon as he came up to us, he started barking and whining to the doctor in a peculiar way. Then the doctor seemed to get all worked up, and he began talking and making queer signs to the dog. At length he turned to me, his face shining with happiness. Polynesia has come back, he cried. Imagine it! Jip says she just arrived at the house. Oh, it's 5 years since I saw her. Excuse me a minute. And he turned off as if to go home. But the parrot, Polynesia, was already flying towards us. The doctor clapped his hands like a child getting a new toy, while the swarm of sparrows in the roadway fluttered, gossiping, up to the fences, highly scandalized to see a gray and scarlet parrot skimming down an English lane. On Polynesia came, straight into the doctor's shoulder, where she immediately began talking a steady stream in a language I could not understand. She seemed to have a terrible lot to say, and very soon the doctor had forgotten all about me and my squirrel and Jip and everything else, till at length the bird clearly asked him something about me. Oh, excuse me, Stubbins, said the doctor. I was so interested in listening to my old friend here. We must get on and see this squirrel of yours. Polynesia, this is Thomas Stubbins. The parrot, on the doctor's shoulder, nodded gravely towards me, and then, to my great surprise, and said quite plainly in English, How do you do? I remember the night you were born. It was terribly cold weather. You were a very ugly baby. Stubbins is anxious to learn animal language, said the doctor. I was just telling him about you and the lessons you gave me, when Jip ran up and told us you had arrived. Well, said the parrot, turning to me, I may have started the doctor learning, but I never could have done even that if he hadn't first taught me to understand what I was saying when I spoke English. You see, many parrots can talk like a person, but very few of them understand what they are saying. They just say it because, well, they fancy it is smart, or because they know it will get crackers given to them. By this time, we had turned and we were going towards my home with Jip running in front and with Polynesia still perched on the doctor's shoulder. The bird chatted incessantly, mostly about Africa, but now she spoke in English, out of politeness to me. How is Prince Bumpo getting on? Asked the doctor. Oh, I'm glad you asked me. I forgot to tell you. What do you think? That Bumpo is in England. In England? You don't say! Cried the doctor. What on earth is he doing here? His father, the king, sent him to a place called, Bulford, I think it was, to study lessons. Bulford, muttered the doctor. I've never heard of that place. Oh, you mean Oxford. Yes, that's the place. Oxford, said Polynesia. I knew it had cattle in it somewhere. Oxford. That's the place he's gone to. Well, fancy Bumpo studying in Oxford. Well, well. There were great things going on when he left. He was the first man from that country to go abroad, but his father made him come. He said all the kings were sending their sons to Oxford now. It was the fashion, and he would have to go. Bumpo wanted to bring his wives with him, but the king wouldn't let him do that either. Poor Bumpo went off in tears, and everyone in the palace was crying too. You've never heard such a hullabaloo. And how is Chi-Chi getting on? Chi-Chi, added the doctor, was a pet monkey I had years ago. I left him in Africa when I came away. Well, said Polynesia, Chi-Chi is not entirely happy. I saw a good deal of him in the last few years. He got dreadfully homesick for you and for the house and the garden. It's funny, but I was just the same way myself. You remember how crazy I was to get back to the dear old land? And Africa is a wonderful place. I don't care what anybody says. Well, I thought I was going to have a perfectly grand time. But somehow, I don't know. After a few weeks, it just seemed to get tiresome. I just couldn't seem to settle down anywhere. Well, to make a long story short, one night I made up my mind that I'd come back here and find you. So I found old Chi-Chi and I told him about it. He said he didn't blame me a bit. He felt the exact same way himself. Africa was so deadly quiet after this life that we led with you. Chi-Chi missed the stories you used to tell us out of your books, and the chats we used to have sitting around the kitchen fire on winter nights. The animals out there were very nice to us and all that. But somehow all the other ones weren't so great. Chi-Chi said he had noticed it too. But I suppose it wasn't they who had changed. It was we who were different. When I left, poor old Chi-Chi broke down and he cried. When he said he felt as though his only friend were leaving him. Though, as you know, he had simply millions of relatives there. He said it didn't seem fair that I should have wings to fly over here any time I liked, and him with no way to follow me. But, mark my words, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he found a way to come. Some day. He is a smart lad, that Chi-Chi. At this point, we arrived at my home. My father's shop was closed and the shutters were shut up, but my mother's were standing at the door looking down the street. Good evening, Mrs. Stubbins, said the doctor. It is my fault your son is so late. I made him stay to supper while his clothes were drying. He was soaked to the skin, and so was I. We ran into one another in the storm, and I insisted on his coming into my house for shelter. I was beginning to get worried about him, said my mother. I am thankful to you, sir, for looking after him so well and for bringing him home. Don't mention it, said the doctor. We have had a very interesting chat. Who might it be that I have the honor of addressing? Asked my mother, staring at the gray parrot perched on Doctor's shoulder. Oh, I'm John Dolittle. I dare say your husband will remember me. He made me some very excellent shoes about 4 years ago. They really are splendid, said the doctor, and gazed down at his feet with great satisfaction. The doctor has come to cure my squirrel, mother, said I. He knows all about animals. Oh, no, said the doctor. Not at all, Stubbins. Not all about them by any means. It is very kind of you to come so far to look after his pet, said my mother. Tom is always bringing home strange creatures from the woods and the fields. Is he? Said the doctor. Perhaps he will grow up to be a naturalist some day. Who knows? Won't you come in? Asked my mother. The place is a little untidy because I haven't finished the spring cleaning yet, but there's a nice fire burning in the parlor. Thank you, said the doctor. What a charming home you have. And after wiping his enormous boots very, very carefully on the mat, the great man passed into the house. And that was the end of chapter 5. So chapter 6 is called The Wounded Squirrel. I hope he fixes him. Inside the house, we found my father busy practicing on the flute beside the fire. This he always did, every evening, after his work was over. The doctor immediately began talking to him about flutes and piccolos and bassoons, and presently my father said, Perhaps you perform upon the flute yourself, sir. Won't you play us a tune? Well, said the doctor, it is a long time since I touched the instrument, but I would like to try. May I? Then the doctor took the flute from my father and played and played and played. It was wonderful. My mother and father sat still as statues, staring up at the ceiling as though they were in church, and even I, who didn't bother much about music except on the mouth organ, even I felt all sad and cold and creepy, and I wished that I had been a better boy. Oh, I think that was just beautiful, sighed my mother. When the doctor stopped. You are a great musician, sir, said my father, a very great musician. Won't you please play us something else? Why, certainly, said the doctor. Oh, but look here, I've forgotten all about the squirrel. I'll show him to you. He's upstairs in my room. So I led the doctor to my bedroom at the top of the house, and I showed him the squirrel and the packing case filled with straw. The animal, who had always seemed very much afraid of me, though I had tried hard to make him feel at home, it sat up at once when the doctor came into the room, and it started to chatter. The doctor chattered back in the same way, and the squirrel, when he was lifted up to have his leg examined, appeared to be rather pleased rather than frightened. I held a candle while the doctor tied up the leg in what he called splints, which he made out of matchsticks with his penknife. "I think you will find that his leg will get better now in a very short time," said the doctor, closing up his bag. "Don't let him run about for at least 2 weeks yet, but keep him in the open air and cover him up with dry leaves if the nights get cool. He tells me he is rather lonely here, all by himself, and he's wondering how his wife and children are getting on. I have assured you are a man to be trusted, and I will send a squirrel who lives in my garden to find out how his family is, and to bring him news of them. He must be kept cheerful at all costs. Squirrels are naturally a very cheerful, active race. It is very hard for them to lie still doing nothing, but you needn't worry about him. He will be all right." Then we went back again to the parlor, and my mother and father kept him playing the flute until after 10 o'clock. Although both my parents liked the doctor tremendously from the first moment they saw him, and they were very proud to have him come and play with us, they did not realize then what a truly great man he was one day to become. Of course now, when almost everybody in the world has heard about Dr. Dolittle and his books, if you were to go to that little house in Puddleby where my father had his cobbler's shop, you would see, in the wall over an old-fashioned door, a stone with writing on it which says, "John Dolittle, the famous naturalist, played the flute in this house in the year 1839. I often look back upon that night long, long ago, and if I close my eyes and think hard, I can see the parlor just as it was then, a funny little man in coat-tails with a round, kind face, playing away on the flute in the front of the fire, my mother on one side of him and my father on the other, holding their breath and listening with their eyes shut, myself, with Jip, squatting on the carpet at his feet, staring into the coals, and Polynesia perched on the mantelpiece beside his shabby high hat, gravely swinging her head from side to side in time to the music. I see it all, just as though it were before me now. And then I remember how, after we had seen the doctor out the front door, we all came back into the parlor and talked about him till it was still later. And even after I did go to bed, I'd never stay up so late in my life. I dreamed about him and a band of strange, clever animals that played flutes and fiddles, drums the whole night. That's the end of chapter 6. So we'll just read chapter 7. Shellfish Talk. The next morning, although I had gone to bed so late the night before, I was up frightfully early. The first sparrows were just beginning to chirp sleepily on the slates outside my attic window, when I jumped out of bed and I scrambled into my clothes. I could hardly wait to get back to the little house with the big garden, to see the doctor and his private zoo. For the first time in my life, I forgot all about breakfast, and, creeping down the stairs on tiptoe, so as not to wake my father and mother, I opened the door and I popped out into the empty, silent street. When I got to the doctor's gate, I suddenly thought that perhaps it was too early to call on anyone, and I began to wonder if the doctor would be up yet. I looked into the garden. No one seemed to be about. So I opened the gate quietly and I went inside. As I turned to the left to go down a path between some hedges, I heard a quiet voice close to me say, "Good morning. How early you are." I turned around, and there, sitting on top of a private hedge, was the great parrot, Polynesia. "Good morning," I said. "I suppose I am rather early. Is the doctor still in bed?" "Oh, no," said Polynesia. "He's been up an hour and a half. You'll find him in the house somewhere. The front door's open. Just push it in and go. He is sure to be in the kitchen cooking breakfast, or working in his study. Walk right in. I'm waiting to see the sun rise. But upon my word, I believe it's forgotten to rise. It is an awful climate, this place. Now, if we were in Africa, the world would be blazing with sunlight at this hour of the morning. Just see that mist rolling over those cabbages? It's enough to give you rheumatism to look at it. Beastly climate. Beastly. Really, I don't know why anything but frogs ever stays in England. Well, don't let me keep you. Run along and see the doctor." "Thank you," I said. "I'll go and look for him." When I opened the front door, I could smell frying bacon, so I made my way to the kitchen. Then I discovered a large kettle boiling away over the fire with some bacon and eggs in a dish upon the hearth. It seemed to me that the bacon was getting all dried up with the heat, so I pulled the dish a little further from the fire, and I went on through the house looking for the doctor. I found him at last in the study. I did not know then that it was called the study. It was certainly a very interesting room, with telescopes and microscopes and all sorts of other strange things, which I did not understand about, but I wished that I did. Hanging on the walls were pictures of animals and fishes and strange plants, and collections of birds' eggs and seashells in glass cases. The doctor was standing at the main table in his dressing gown. At first I thought he was washing his face. He had a square glass box before him full of water. He was holding one ear under the water while he covered up the other with his left hand. As I came in, he stood up. "Good morning, Stubbins," said he. It's going to be a nice day, don't you think? I've just been listening to the whiff-waff, but he is disappointing. Very. Why, I said, didn't you find that he has any language at all? Oh, yes, said the doctor, he has a language, but it is such a poor language. Only a few words, like yes and no, hot and cold. That's all he can say. It's very disappointing. You see, he really belongs to 2 different families of fishes. I thought he was going to be tremendously helpful. Well. I suppose, said I, that means he hasn't very much sense if his language is only 2 or 3 words. I suppose it does. Possibly it is the kind of life he leads. You see, they are very rare now, these whiff-waffs. Very rare and very solitary. They swim around in the deepest parts of the ocean entirely by themselves, always alone. So I presume they really don't need to talk much. Perhaps some kind of bigger shellfish would talk more. After all, he is very small, isn't he? Yes, said the doctor, that's true. Oh, I have no doubt that there are shellfish who are good talkers, not the least doubt. But the big shellfish, the biggest of them, are so hard to catch. They are only to be found in the deep parts of the sea, and they don't swim very much. But they just crawl along the floor of the ocean most of the time, and they are very seldom taken in nets. I do wish I could find some way of going down to the bottom of the sea. I could learn a lot if I could only do that. But we are forgetting all about breakfast. Have you had breakfast yet, Stubbins? I told the doctor I had forgotten all about it, and he at once led the way into the kitchen. Yes, he said, as he poured the hot water from the kettle into the teapot. If a man could only manage to get right down to the bottom of the sea and live there a while, he would discover some wonderful things that people have never dreamed of. But men do go down, don't they? I asked. Divers and people like that? Oh, yes, to be sure, said the doctor. Divers go down. I've been down many times myself in a diving suit. But they only go where the sea is shallow. Divers can't go down where it is really deep. What I would like to do is go down into great depths where it is miles deep. Well, I dare say. I shall manage this some day. Let me give you another cup of tea. That's the end of chapter 7. Thanks for reading with me. But before we wrap up, I have to tell you the code word for the summer reading program. Have you been listening? If you have, you get credit. You get a raffle ticket for listening to us. So, the code word for today is shellfish, because he's learning shellfish language. So thanks for reading that with me. Have a fun day.